and welcome back to my channel. My name is Amber and I'm just beginning my YouTube journey here, and today's video is going to be a faith related video. I'm a Christian and I want my content to reflect that. So today's video is going to be a bit of a Bible study with me. I've gone over this Bible study and just in my own quiet time, and I really felt like sharing. So the title of this Bible study is Life is Meaningless Apart from God, and that sounds really drab, but it doesn't sound like the most fun. I'm trying to find my place in the Bible. It doesn't sound like the most fun talk to have, but I think it's an important one, and I think that in it we can find purpose and freedom. So the title of it, like I said, is Life is Meaningless Apart from God, and we are beginning in Ecclesiastes 1, 2, and 3, this Bible study. So a little bit of background on Ecclesiastes is that its writer is Solomon. So if you know a little bit about the Bible, Solomon wrote Song of Songs, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, and I really recommend all three books. Obviously, I would recommend the entire Bible, but Song of Songs is kind of like a love poem, is what I would compare it to. Proverbs, to me, is like wisdom, and then Ecclesiastes is kind of dim and dark, and that's where we're gonna be. But its purpose is kind of to convey that in all of his experience, he didn't feel like it meant anything because he didn't really keep God at the forefront. So Song of Songs was written when Solomon was young, probably in his late teenage years, early 20s, his younger years. Proverbs in his middle years, so I'm not even gonna try to guess what that is, but in his, middle adulthood. And then Ecclesiastes was written when he was old. He was an older person and he had seen a spiritual decline. So he had experienced idolatry, he had had many ungodly wives, and he had lived a life of self-indulgence. So, and he starts out, I'm gonna read verse 3 through 5 here. He says, "What does man gain from all of his labor at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises." And that is under the subtitle, Everything is Meaningless. So what he's saying here is that all of our activities under the earth, in the end, are meaningless when carried out apart from God's desires and purposes. In fact, our very lives lack true purpose and fulfillment when we reject a personal relationship with God. That just speaks to me on so many levels, because what's the point? Like, what's the point of going through all of this and going through life if it's meaningless, right? Because it's meaningless apart from God. The author's aim here is to destroy, the false hope that people, and I place in, a secular worldview that doesn't include God. So when our worldview doesn't include God, we have this false hope that we place in it. He wants them to really understand and see the serious and dire reality of evil, injustice, and death, and to realize that life apart from God has no meaning and cannot produce true happiness. The solution to the problem of hopelessness is found through faith and trust in God. Knowing and depending on Him is the only thing that can make our life worthwhile as Christians. He talks about how everything is meaningless, and then he goes on to say that wisdom is meaningless. He says, what does wisdom gain me? He says, "Look, I've grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who's ever ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of knowledge and wisdom. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly, but I learned this too is a chasing after the wind," or in other words, meaningless. So he has all the wisdom that others that have ruled over Jerusalem haven't had. But at the end of the day, and at the end of his life, he thinks it doesn't matter. It's meaningless. He goes on to say that pleasures are meaningless without God, and that wisdom versus foolishness are meaningless. He says that what better is it to be wise than to be foolish if you both have the same destiny? If you're not putting God as the forefront of your life. And then he says toil is meaningless. He says a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him who can eat or find enjoyment? To the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. You know, and in the notes section of my Bible, I have a study Bible, and so this part is all scripture, and then on the bottom it has notes, or the authors of the notes kind of view or commentary on it. And my Bible is the Fire Bible Global Study Edition. It is an NIV Bible, just in case you're wondering. But in my Bible it says we must view life as a gift from God and allow him to work out his purposes for us. Yeah, we have to remind ourselves of that daily. Life is a literal gift. We don't deserve it, and we didn't do anything to earn it, but we have it. It's kind of like grace, you know? We woke up this morning and we have to view that as a gift. And I wrote that down in my notebook. The ability to enjoy life the way it was meant to be is a gift from God that is only possible through right relationship with him and when we submit ourselves fully to his leadership. Like, that's something that I should just write on sticky notes all over my house, because that's something that I forget or I just don't live out. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. There's a time for everything. And if you haven't read this, I'm actually just gonna read it to you because I think this part of scripture is really insightful and it's oftentimes taken out of context. But he says there is a time for everything and a season for everything under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stone and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. He says we're, kind of restricted by the influence of the times in our lives. And we don't really have any control over these times, right? But God has an eternal plan outside of our plan, that includes his purposes and activities, and it includes purposes and activities of every person on the earth. God's saying there's literally a time for everything under the sun. There's a time for joy and a time for sadness and a time for all emotions and a time for, all activities. And if we do them kind of in the wrong timing, that can be an issue for us. Because if we're not, if we live in the right kind of time constraints and in God's will, our lives are going to be a lot better in the end. So I wanted to point that out, and then I wanted to point, the last thing I wanted to point out of my study over these 3 chapters is chapter 3, verse 11. And it says, I'm going to start at 9 actually. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to the end. And what I kind of wanted to point out in there was that God has set eternity in the hearts of men, and I think that is so important. So, what to know, what I think that verse is really saying is that we have an inborn desire for something beyond our earthly existence. We want to be a part of something with eternal meaning. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants to be a part of something greater than themselves. Everyone wants to be a part of something with eternal meaning or lasting meaning. And this is why the material things of this world and even just these earthly activities that we take part in are never going to be enough. Your sports team, it's never going to be enough. Your book club is never going to be enough. Your super expensive designer purse is never going to be enough. Even if you have like every purse you've ever wanted, or every fill in the blank that you've ever wanted, it's not going to be enough because it doesn't have eternal meaning, and it's meaningless apart from God. And these activities, they're never going to satisfy us. And so I guess that's the message that I wanted to leave you with today, is that these activities that we do here on earth, these material items that we possess here on earth, and just our lives in general don't satisfy us, and they won't satisfy us unless we have a right relationship with Christ and like I said, the obedience and submitting ourselves fully to his leadership. I'm going to repeat that one big quote that I was like, write this down. It's the ability to enjoy life the way it was meant to be is a gift from God that is only possible through a right relationship with him when we submit ourselves to his leadership. So, if you want to enjoy life and you want to experience true joy, submit yourself to God's leadership. Let him lead you. And I just had kind of an experience with this today, an experience of obedience, and all things work out when you're obedient to God. And I just want to leave you with that piece of information. All things will work out according to God's plan when you're obedient to him. So it might not look how you want it to, and it might not look how I want it to, but I know it's gonna work out because I was obedient. And somebody had texted me today and said, God's love language is obedience. And I was like, you're right, I need to be obedient. Like, how did you know that? So that's just something to remember. Be obedient, submit yourself to his leadership, and you will be able to enjoy life the way it's meant to be enjoyed. So, and you'll be able to enjoy that gift, and always remember that it is a gift. So, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, leave a comment down below. If you wanted to add to this study, leave a comment down below. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, and if you like this kind of content or my past content, please subscribe. Thank you.